The text arrived at 6:47 a.m. on December 23rd. Christmas dinner 6 p.m. sharp. Try to dress appropriately this year. And please don't bore everyone with stories about your little computer business. I stared at the message while my coffee brewed. 33 years old, and my mother still couldn't acknowledge that I ran anything more than a little computer business. My phone buzzed again. This time from Victoria Chin, Senior Corporate Counsel at Hartwell & Associates. Victoria, Ms. Wilson, final acquisition documents ready. You now control 94% of voting shares. Board meeting scheduled December 26, 9 a.m. Shall we proceed with management restructuring? I smiled and typed my reply, proceed. Mom had no idea that her little computer business daughter had just bought her company. I was the accident. Not in the cruel, intentional sense. My parents never said it outright. But growing up in the Wilson household, the math was impossible to ignore. My sister Olivia was born in 1987, the planned firstborn, the deliberate heir to the Wilson legacy. I arrived in 1991 4 years later, a surprise that disrupted my mother's carefully orchestrated return to the workforce. Mom, Catherine Wilson, had built Wilson Communications from nothing. She'd started with a single radio station in 1985, purchased with a loan she'd fought 3 banks to approve. By the time Olivia was born, Wilson Communications owned 4 stations. By the time I arrived unexpectedly, the company had grown to 11 stations and was expanding into early cable television. My birth, according to family legend told at every holiday, nearly derailed everything. I had to choose between the Chicago acquisition and maternity leave, Mom would say, wine glass in hand, as though I should apologize for existing. Fortunately, your father stepped up. Dad, stepping up meant hiring a nanny. Several nannies actually, because I went through them quickly. Not because I was difficult. I was quiet, bookish, the kind of child who entertained herself for hours. But Mom's standards were impossible, and she fired caregivers the way other people changed seasonal decorations. Olivia, meanwhile, had been old enough to attend the Montessori program Mom had hand-selected. She'd been groomed from toddlerhood to take over Wilson Communications. Ballet, piano, public speaking, business camp at age 12. Olivia had the full heir-apparent experience. I got hand-me-downs and a rotating cast of exhausted nannies. My first concrete memory of understanding my place in the family came when I was 7 years old. It was career day at school and parents were invited to speak to the class about their jobs. I'd asked Mom weeks in advance, practically begged her to come talk about the radio stations. She'd said yes. I'd told everyone my mom was coming, the mom who owned radio stations, who was important and successful and would definitely impress Mrs. Patterson's second-grade class. Mom didn't show up. Dad came instead, apologizing quietly to the teacher while I sat at my desk, face burning as my classmates whispered. Mom had been called away to a board meeting. An emergency, Dad explained. Very important. That night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. You promised her, Catherine. The Hendricks deal couldn't wait. She'll understand when she's older. She's 7. Olivia would have understood. That girl has business sense. Natalie's too sensitive. I learned to stop asking Mom for things after that. The second memory crystallized when I was 13. Olivia was 17, already interning at Wilson Communications during summers, learning the business from the inside. I'd developed an interest in computers, not just using them but understanding how they worked. I taught myself basic programming from library books and online tutorials, staying up late to build simple websites on our family's dial-up connection. I made the mistake of showing Mom a website I'd built. It was a fan page for a band I liked. Nothing sophisticated, but I'd coded it myself from scratch, learned HTML and CSS through sheer determination. That's nice, honey, Mom said, barely glancing at the screen. But you know, Olivia just closed her first advertising deal at the station. $15,000. That's what real business looks like. She walked away before I could explain that I'd also started a small web design service, that I'd made $200 that month building sites for local businesses I'd cold called. $200 meant nothing to a woman who ran a media empire, so I didn't bother mentioning it. I shut down the web design business. Not because Mom had discouraged me, but because I'd learned to keep my ambitions private. What the family didn't know, they couldn't dismiss. The third defining memory happened when I was 19. I'd been accepted to MIT, full scholarship, early admission, one of 47 students nationwide selected for their computer science honors program. I'd applied in secret, interviewed in secret, received the acceptance letter in secret. When I finally told Mom, she'd looked up from her laptop with genuine confusion. MIT? For what? Computer science. They have one of the best programs in the country. But Olivia's at Stanford Business School. We always planned for you both to attend Stanford. The connections there are invaluable for media careers. I don't want a media career, Mom. I want to build technology. The conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes. Mom explained in exhaustive detail why my computer hobby wasn't a real career path. How technology was a bubble that would burst any day. How I was throwing away opportunities by rejecting Stanford. I hadn't even applied. How Olivia would inherit Wilson Communications, and I would need to find my place in the company structure. Perhaps marketing, perhaps human resources, something suited to my temperament. I went to MIT anyway. Mom didn't attend my graduation. Wilson Communications was acquiring a television network that weekend, a deal that had been in progress for 8 months and could have been scheduled around the ceremony. But Olivia was presenting to the board that same day, and both parents needed to be there for support. I watched my classmates celebrate with their families while I stood alone in my cap and gown valedictorian of my program, holding a degree that meant nothing to the people who should have cared most. That was the day I stopped expecting anything from them. Christmas at the Wilson estate was always a production. Mom believed in presentation. The 12-foot Douglas fir professionally decorated in silver and white, the catered dinner served on china that had been in the family for 4 generations, the dress code that everyone pretended was casual elegant, but actually required designer labels and subtle jewelry. I arrived at 5:47 p.m. 13 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress I'd owned for 3 years. No designer labels. No statement jewelry. Nothing that would invite questions about how I could afford nice things on my little computer business salary. The estate was already full. Olivia had arrived the day before with her husband Jonathan, a venture capitalist she'd met at Stanford, and their 2 children who were being supervised by a nanny in the playroom. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Richard were holding court in the living room, discussing their recent trip to the Maldives. Cousins I saw once a year milled about with champagne glasses, making small talk about promotions and property values. I found my assigned seat at the dinner table. Far end, naturally. Between cousin Derek, who sold pharmaceutical equipment and never stopped talking about it, and Aunt Margaret, who had opinions about my unmarried status. Dinner proceeded through its predictable phases. The appetizer course featured discussion of Wilson Communications stock price, up 12% this quarter, thanks to Olivia's leadership. The soup course included analysis of the upcoming board meeting, December 26th, major strategic decisions expected. The main course brought the inevitable comparison. Olivia's being considered for CEO, Mom announced, as though this were news and not the foregone conclusion everyone had expected for 20 years. The board meeting on Friday will make it official. Applause scattered around the table. Jonathan beamed at his wife. Dad raised his glass. To Olivia, Mom continued, who's worked so hard to earn this position. Earned. As though being handed a company built by your mother, groomed from childhood for the role, given every advantage and opportunity, as though any of that was earning. I kept my face neutral. I'd had 33 years of practice. Natalie, Aunt Margaret said, turning to me with the expression she reserved for discussing disappointing relatives. What about you? Still doing your little website thing? Something like that. She's playing office with her startup, Mom said, not bothering to lower her voice. It's cute, really. Very entrepreneurial. Even if nothing ever comes of it. Olivia smirked from across the table. At least she's trying. Remember when she thought she'd get rich building websites for local businesses? What was that 15 years ago? The table laughed. I sipped my wine. Honestly, Natalie, Mom continued, when will you get serious? You're 33. Olivia was already a VP by your age. You're still playing pretend with computers in some tiny apartment. I have a house, actually. Mom waved her hand dismissively. A starter home, I'm sure. You know, there's always a place for you at Wilson Communications. Data entry, perhaps. Something to give you real business experience. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it. Your mother's right, Dad added. You can't keep chasing this tech fantasy forever. The bubble's going to burst any day now. The bubble. They'd been predicting the tech bubble would burst for 15 years. My phone buzzed again. And again. 3 messages in rapid succession. I excused myself to the powder room and checked the screen. Victoria Chin. Ms. Wilson, the institutional investors have confirmed. You now control 94% of voting shares as of 5 p.m. today. Victoria Chin. The board has been notified of the emergency meeting. They're expecting a standard quarterly review. Victoria Chin. They have no idea what's coming. We're ready when you are. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The same face that had watched mom miss career day. The same eyes that had seen parents skip graduation. The same woman who'd been dismissed, diminished, and ignored for 3 decades. In approximately 60 hours, that woman would own Wilson Communications. I washed my hands, fixed my expression, and returned to dinner. What my family didn't know about me would fill several volumes. They didn't know that my little computer business, a cloud infrastructure company called Novatech Solutions, had been valued at $890 million in our last funding round. We provided back-end systems for 347 enterprise clients, including 12 Fortune 100 companies. Annual revenue, $127 million. Profit margin, 31%. Growth rate, 47% year-over-year for the past 4 years. They didn't know that I'd sold my first company at 26 for $23 million. A cybersecurity firm I'd built from my MIT dorm room, acquired by a defense contractor who valued my encryption algorithms at 8 figures. I'd used that money to start Novatech and never looked back. They didn't know that Forbes had profiled me twice, though I'd requested both times that my photo not be included. The journalists respected my privacy. The articles referred to me as the infrastructure queen and the most successful founder you've never heard of. I preferred it that way. They didn't know that I owned a house, not a starter home, but a $4.2 million estate in Palo Alto with 7 bedrooms and a view of the hills. I'd paid cash. I'd also purchased investment properties in Austin, Seattle, and Manhattan. Total real estate portfolio value, $18.7 million. They didn't know any of this because I'd never told them. Why would I? Every interaction made it clear that nothing I accomplished would ever matter. Olivia was the heir. I was the accident. No amount of success would change that fundamental family arithmetic. So I'd stopped trying to change it and started planning something different. Wilson Communications had been on my radar for 3 years. Not because I wanted the company, I had no interest in running a media empire. But because I'd watched what Olivia was doing to it and I'd recognized the pattern. Olivia was a talented presenter but a terrible strategist. She'd risen through Wilson Communications not through competence but through birthright, promoted past peers who'd spent decades learning the business. She'd surrounded herself with yes-men who told her what she wanted to hear. She'd ignored the streaming revolution, dismissed podcasting as radio for millennials, and invested heavily in traditional television advertising while the market shifted to digital. Wilson Communications' stock price was up 12% this quarter. What Mom didn't mention at dinner was that the company had lost 23% over the past 3 years. The recent uptick was a dead cat bounce, driven by cost-cutting measures that had gutted the workforce and sold off valuable assets. The company wasn't thriving. It was being stripped for parts. 18 months ago I'd started acquiring stock. Quietly, through a network of shell companies and institutional investors who owed me favors. The family trust controlled 34% of voting shares. Olivia personally held 8%. Various board members and executives held another 11%. That left 47% floating in the public market. I'd spent 18 months and $340 million acquiring 41% of those shares. The remaining 6% had been purchased by institutional investors I'd personally recruited, pension funds and hedge funds who'd agreed to vote with me in exchange for guaranteed returns and board representation. As of 5 p.m. today, I controlled 94% of Wilson Communications voting shares. The board meeting on December 26th, the meeting where Olivia expected to be crowned CEO, would instead feature a very different announcement. My phone buzzed throughout the rest of Christmas dinner. I ignored most of the messages, responding only to the most urgent. Victoria Chin, board notifications sent. They're expecting a routine meeting. Marcus Webb, my CFO, final acquisition costs, $341.7 million. Well within budget. David Santos, my operations director, transition team standing by. Ready to implement new management structure on your signal. The family, meanwhile, continued their traditional Christmas activities. Dessert featured more discussion of Olivia's ascension. Coffee included speculation about which of Olivia's first initiatives as CEO would be most transformative. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her transformative plans involved more cost-cutting and asset sales. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for the gift exchange. Mom presided over the proceedings like a benevolent monarch, distributing presents according to some internal hierarchy that placed Olivia's family at the center and me at the periphery. I received a gift card to a home organization store. For your little apartment, Mom explained. I know space is tight when you're just starting out. Olivia received a diamond tennis bracelet. For the new Sue, Mom said, beaming. You've earned it, sweetheart. I thanked Mom politely for the gift card and excused myself to make a phone call. In the quiet of the library, surrounded by leather-bound books that no one in the family had ever read, I dialed Victoria Chin. Everything ready? Everything's ready, Ms. Wilson. The board meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. December 26th. Your presentation materials have been distributed to the proxy voters. The new management structure has been drafted pending your approval. And I've prepared the termination packages for current executive leadership. How many executives? 7, including the current CEO designate. The current CEO designate. My sister. Victoria, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge. I understand, Ms. Wilson. Olivia's had 20 years to learn this business. She's chosen to ignore every warning sign, dismiss every advisor who told her the truth, and run the company into the ground while convincing herself she's a visionary. The 1,200 employees who work at Wilson Communications deserve better leadership. The transition plan reflects that priority. Employee retention packages, operational continuity measures, investment in the divisions Olivia's been planning to sell. The company will be stronger under your leadership. I stared out the library window at the snow falling on Mom's immaculate gardens. I'm not planning to lead it myself. I'll install proper management, restructure the board, set a sustainable strategic direction. Then I'll step back to an advisory role. Whatever you decide, Ms. Wilson. You'll have 94% voting control. The company will do whatever you want. Whatever I wanted. For 33 years I'd wanted my family to see me. To acknowledge that I existed, that I mattered, that I was capable of something beyond playing office, with my little computer business. Now they would see me. Whether they wanted to or not. Christmas Day passed in a blur of forced family togetherness. I smiled through brunch, nodded through church, maintained composure through an afternoon of watching Olivia's children open more presents than any two humans could reasonably use. By evening I'd escaped to my rental car and driven to the hotel where I'd booked a suite. The family thought I was staying in the guest house. I'd told Mom I had work calls that might disturb everyone. She'd barely registered the lie. December 26th arrived with crystalline winter sunlight and a text from Victoria. Victoria, board assembling now. They still have no idea. Ready when you are. I dressed carefully, not in my usual understated style, but in an Armani suit I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, projecting exactly the authority I intended to demonstrate. The Wilson Communications headquarters occupied a glass tower in downtown Chicago, 14 floors of offices, studios, and conference rooms that represented 60 years of family legacy. I'd visited twice as a child, both times relegated to a secretary's supervision while Mom attended important meetings. Today I walked through the lobby like I owned the place. Because I did. Security didn't recognize me. Why would they? I'd never worked here, never been invited to board meetings, never been considered relevant to the company's operations. I signed in as Natalie Wilson, shareholder representative, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. 12 seats around an oval table, each occupied by executives and board members I recognized from proxy statements and annual reports. At the head of the table sat Richard Carmichael, the outgoing CEO who'd been warming the seat for Olivia's coronation. To his right sat my mother, chairman of the board. To his left sat Olivia, already positioned in the CEO-designate spot she'd been promised. They all looked up when I walked in. Natalie. Mom's confusion was genuine. What are you doing here? I'm a shareholder, Mom. I have a right to attend board meetings. Olivia laughed. You own like 50 shares from when Grandpa gave us stock as kids. That doesn't make you a board participant. I took one of the empty seats along the wall, the observer section typically occupied by junior analysts and administrative staff. I'll just listen then. Mom and Olivia exchanged glances but didn't object. The meeting proceeded. Richard Carmichael opened with a review of quarterly performance. The numbers were worse than what Mom had shared at Christmas. Revenue down 8%, operating costs up 14%, 3 major advertisers requesting contract renegotiations. He spun it as strategic repositioning and market adjustment, but the board members' faces reflected growing concern. We remain confident in our path forward, Richard concluded, particularly with Olivia's visionary leadership ready to take the helm. Mom beamed. I'd like to formally nominate my daughter Olivia Wilson-Chambers for the position of Chief Executive Officer. Seconded, said a board member I didn't recognize, one of Mom's longtime allies. Discussion? Richard asked. Before anyone could speak, the boardroom doors opened. Victoria Chin walked in, followed by 2 associates carrying document boxes. Behind them came Marcus Webb, my CFO, and David Santos, my operations director. People nobody in this room had ever met but who knew more about Wilson Communications' actual financial position than anyone at this table. I apologize for the interruption, Victoria said, addressing the room with the calm authority of someone who'd orchestrated hostile takeovers for 20 years. But before this board votes on any executive appointments, there's a matter of share ownership that needs to be addressed. Mom's face shifted from confusion to irritation. Who are you? This is a private board meeting. Victoria Chin, Senior Counsel at Hartwell & Associates. I represent the majority shareholder of Wilson Communications. I'm the majority shareholder, Mom said, voice sharp. The Wilson Family Trust controls 34%. Controlled, Mrs. Wilson. Victoria opened a leather portfolio. As of 5 p.m. on December 23, the majority voting position changed hands. My client now controls 94% of this company's voting shares. The room went still. Richard Carmichael dropped his pen. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence. That's impossible, Olivia said, but her voice had gone thin. Nobody owns that much. The institutional investors are voting with my client, Victoria confirmed, per agreement signed over the past 18 months. Combined with the direct share purchases through subsidiary entities, total voting control is 94.3%. Mom's face had drained of color. Who is your client? Victoria turned to look at me. Ms. Wilson? Would you like to introduce yourself to the board? Every head in the room swiveled in my direction. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket. My name is Natalie Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Novatech Solutions, a cloud infrastructure company valued at $890 million. I'm also the owner of several investment vehicles that have spent the past 18 months acquiring majority control of Wilson Communications. Mom's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the conference table. As of this moment, I continued, I control 94% of voting shares, which means any executive appointments, any strategic decisions, any board compositions, all of it requires my approval. Olivia made a sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. Furthermore, Victoria added, Ms. Wilson has prepared a comprehensive restructuring proposal. New management, new strategic direction, new board composition. The materials have been distributed to all proxy voters. She handed Mom a bound document, 73 pages outlining exactly how I intended to transform the company she'd built and nearly allowed her golden child to destroy. This is. Mom's voice cracked. This can't be legal. It's entirely legal, Mrs. Wilson. Every acquisition was properly documented, every proxy agreement properly executed. Your daughter, your other daughter, has executed one of the cleanest corporate takeovers in recent memory. Victoria paused. Quietly, methodically, while everyone in this room was too busy dismissing her to notice what she was doing. Marcus Webb stepped forward with his tablet. If I may, Ms. Wilson has asked me to present some additional context for the board. I nodded. Wilson Communications has lost $47 million in market value over the past 3 years. The streaming division, which was profitable in 2019, now operates at a $12 million annual loss. The podcast initiative, abandoned after 6 months, resulted in $8 million in sunk costs. The television advertising business has declined 34% while the industry average decline was 18%. He looked directly at Olivia. The CEO designates proposed strategy involves selling the digital operations, the only growing segment, to fund continued investment in traditional media. Our analysts project this approach would render the company insolvent within 4 years. Olivia's husband Jonathan, who'd been sitting in the observer section, dropped his phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. By contrast, Marcus continued, Ms. Wilson's restructuring plan involves retaining the digital operations, investing in streaming infrastructure, and transitioning the traditional media assets to support digital distribution. Projected return to profitability, 18 months. Projected 5-year revenue growth, 340%. The room remained frozen. 12 executives and board members sat in various states of shock. Pale faces, dropped jaws, trembling hands. Mom finally found her voice. Natalie, you did this. How did you? I met her eyes. I built a company, Mom. A real company. The kind you always said I was incapable of creating. And then I used that company's resources to acquire this one, because 1,200 people work here, and they deserve better than being let off a cliff by someone who got her position through nepotism instead of competence. Olivia stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this. You can't just take our company. It's not your company, Olivia. It's a publicly traded corporation. And the public, the shareholders, have chosen me to lead it. This is revenge, Olivia spat. This is because you're jealous. You've always been jealous. I smiled slightly. If I wanted revenge, I would have let you become CEO. I would have watched you destroy everything Mom built, exactly the way you've been destroying it for the past 5 years. I would have let the company collapse, let 1,200 people lose their jobs, let the family name become synonymous with failure. I paused. This isn't revenge, Olivia. This is salvation. You just can't tell the difference. Immediate consequences. Victoria Chin cleared her throat. Ms. Wilson, shall we proceed with the formal motions? I returned to my seat, not the observer section this time but the chair at the head of the table. Richard Carmichael, recognizing the shift in power, vacated the CEO position without a word. Motion to table the current CEO nomination, I said. All proxy votes in favor? Victoria checked her tablet. 94% in favor. Motion carries. Olivia's face went white. Motion to appoint an independent review committee for all executive positions, with authority to terminate for cause any executive found to have materially contributed to the company's financial decline. 94% in favor. Motion carries. Richard Carmichael's pen slipped from his trembling fingers. Motion to suspend all pending asset sales, including the proposed divestiture of digital operations. 94% in favor. Motion carries. I watched my mother's face as each motion passed. Confusion had given way to horror, and horror was giving way to something else. The slow, dawning recognition of complete powerlessness. One final motion for today, I said. Motion to remove Catherine Wilson as chairman of the board, effective immediately, and to install independent directors selected by the majority shareholder. Mom's hand flew to her throat. You can't, Natalie, I'm your mother. 94% in favor, Victoria said quietly. Motion carries. The boardroom doors opened again. 2 members of the building's security team entered, accompanied by a woman I'd personally recruited, Janet Morrison, former chief operating officer of a Fortune 500 media company, with 30 years of experience Mom had never bothered to acquire. Mrs. Wilson, Janet said, her voice professionally neutral, I'll need you to surrender your building access credentials. Your office will be cleared and your personal effects shipped to your home address. Mom didn't move. She sat frozen, champagne stains spreading across the documents in front of her, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Security will escort you out, Janet continued. You're welcome to retain your honorary title as founder, but all operational authority has been transferred. The security guards waited. Mom, moving like someone in a dream, removed her access badge and placed it on the table. Natalie, she whispered. Please. I met her eyes. You missed my career day when I was 7. You dismissed my first business when I was 13. You skipped my graduation when I was 22. For 33 years, you've treated me like an inconvenience, an afterthought, an accident that disrupted your real priorities. Kept my voice level. This isn't punishment, Mom. This is just the first time you've ever had to take me seriously. The security guards led my mother from the boardroom. She didn't look back. Escalating consequences. Within the hour, the consequences began cascading. Olivia's corporate credit cards were deactivated. Standard procedure during executive transitions, Victoria assured the board, though the timing was particularly pointed. Her company car, a Mercedes she'd been driving since her promotion to VP, was reclaimed by fleet management. Her corner office was sealed pending the independent review. Jonathan tried to call his firm, presumably to activate whatever crisis management protocols venture capitalists used when their wives' family companies got taken over. I knew from my due diligence that his fund had $23 million invested in Wilson Communications, an investment that had been quietly arranged through Mom's connections rather than proper vetting procedures. That investment was now subject to review. The institutional investors have issued statements. Victoria informed me after the board meeting concluded. They're expressing confidence in new leadership. Stock futures are up 8% in pre-market trading. 8%. The market had immediately recognized what the Wilson family had refused to see for decades. I knew what I was doing. The news spread quickly. By noon, 3 major financial outlets had published stories about the surprise takeover of Wilson Communications by the founder's estranged daughter. Journalists were requesting interviews. Analysts were upgrading their ratings. The 1,200 employees who'd been bracing for another round of Olivia-led layoffs were cautiously optimistic. I released a single statement through Victoria's office. Wilson Communications has tremendous potential. Under new leadership, we will invest in our people, modernize our infrastructure, and build a sustainable future for this company. No workforce reductions are planned. The employee Slack channels, which I'd gained access to through the transition team, exploded with relief and cautious celebration. Meanwhile, the family was imploding. Final consequences. By evening, I'd received 14 text messages from various relatives. Aunt Margaret demanding explanations, Cousin Derek offering investment advice, Uncle Richard requesting a meeting to discuss family matters. I responded to none of them. The message from Dad arrived at 7:43 p.m. Dad, what you did today was wrong. Your mother is devastated. Olivia is hysterical. You've torn this family apart. I hope you're happy. I read it twice, then typed my response. Natalie, for 33 years I didn't exist to this family. Now suddenly I matter because I have something you want. That's not love, Dad. That's self-interest. I'll be happy to discuss family matters once everyone has had time to adjust to the new reality. Until then, I have a company to save. I blocked his number. The final consequence came 3 days later, when the Independent Review Committee released its preliminary findings. Olivia's tenure as VP had involved 17 instances of financial irregularity, including 3 cases where she'd approved vendor contracts for companies owned by Jonathan's investment partners. The conflicts of interest were so blatant that the committee recommended immediate termination with cause. Olivia wouldn't be charged criminally, the amounts were too small for prosecutors to care, but her career in corporate leadership was effectively over. No board would touch her after the report became public. Mom's removal as chairman meant she'd lost her voting position on the board, her corner office, her company car, her executive assistant, and her identity as the head of Wilson Communications. She'd built the company from nothing, and now she would watch her accident daughter rebuild it into something she'd never imagined. The power reversal was complete. 2 weeks after the takeover, I visited Mom at the family estate. She met me in the library, the same room where I'd hidden to make phone calls during Christmas dinner, the same space lined with books nobody had ever read. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with age. You could have warned me, she said, not looking up from her untouched tea. You could have told me what you'd become. Would you have listened? Silence. I tried to tell you, Mom. Every holiday, every phone call, every interaction, I tried to share what I was building. You dismissed it. Every time. Playing office. Little computer business. When will you get serious? I gave up trying to impress you years ago. He finally met my eyes. So this is my fault. You destroyed my company because I hurt your feelings. I didn't destroy your company. I saved it. Olivia was 18 months from bankruptcy. The restructuring plan, the asset sales, the workforce reductions, it would have killed Wilson Communications. 1,200 people would have lost their jobs. Your legacy would have been failure. And now my legacy is losing control to my own daughter. I sat down across from her. Your legacy is building something from nothing. One radio station in 1985, a $340 million media company 40 years later. That legacy is intact. What's changed is who carries it forward. Mom's hands trembled around her teacup. I don't understand. You never showed any interest in the company. Because you never gave me the chance. Olivia got internships, mentorship, grooming. I got hand-me-downs and career day disappointments. Kept my voice level. I didn't want Wilson Communications, Mom. I wanted you to see me. To acknowledge that I existed, that I was capable of something. You never did. I saw you. You saw an inconvenience. An accident that disrupted your career plans. A disappointment who would never measure up to the real Air. I paused. So I stopped trying to measure up. I built my own thing instead. And it turns out I'm better at business than Olivia ever was. The silence stretched between us. 33 years of distance, of dismissal, of invisible barriers. It all lived in that quiet space. What happens now? Mom finally asked. That depends on you. The company doesn't need you. I've installed competent management, and the restructuring is already showing results. But you're still my mother. That means something even if it didn't mean anything to you. Of course it meant something. Did it? I held up a hand before she could protest. I'm not interested in relitigating the past. We can't change what happened. But we can decide what happens next. What do you want? I'd thought about this question for months. Here's really. What did I want from a family that had never wanted me? I want acknowledgement, I said finally. Not an apology. Words don't undo 33 years. I want you to see me. To understand what I've accomplished and to respect it. Not because I own your company now, but because I'm your daughter and I deserve it. Mom's eyes glistened. And if I do that, if I see you, then we can try to have a relationship. A real one. Not based on who's successful or who inherits what, but on actually knowing each other. I stood. But I won't force it. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your attention. I'm done trying. If you want to know me, the real me, the one you ignored, you know where to find me. I walked to the door, then paused. The board meeting is next month. First quarterly review under new management. You're welcome to attend as a guest. Not as chairman, not as a decision maker, just as the founder. A symbolic role. Mom looked up. You'd allow that? You built this company, Mom. That matters. Even if you forgot that raising me mattered too. I left her sitting in the library, surrounded by unread books and decades of choices she couldn't undo. 3 months later, Wilson Communications reported its first profitable quarter in 2 years. The digital division, which Olivia had planned to sell, had grown 23% under new leadership. The podcast initiative had been relaunched with proper investment, generating $4.2 million in new revenue. The 1,200 employees who'd feared for their jobs were still employed, with a new profit-sharing program that gave them stake in the company's success. Mom attended the board meeting as a guest. She sat in the observer section, the same seats where I'd sat during my first appearance, and watched me lead the company she'd built. She didn't speak during the meeting. But afterward in the hallway she stopped me. You were right, she said quietly. About Olivia. About the company. About everything. I know. I'm sorry, Natalie. For all of it. I nodded once. It's a start. We stood there, mother and daughter, separated by 33 years of distance and connected by the same stubborn determination that had built a media empire and then saved it from destruction. Come to dinner next week, she said. Just us. No Olivia, no expectations. Just talking. I considered the invitation. The woman in front of me wasn't the mother I'd wanted. She wasn't the parent I'd deserved. But she was trying for the first time to see me. Hey, I said. Next week. She smiled, hesitantly, uncertainly, like someone learning a new expression. I walked away toward the elevator, toward the company I now controlled, toward a future I'd built entirely on my own terms. Behind me, my mother watched me go. For the first time in 33 years, she was paying attention. And for the first time, I didn't need her to.